The sun spilled over the snow-capped peaks of Telluride, casting a warm golden glow on the small bakery I'd run for over 30 years. Folks around here called me Miss Cece, the sweet old lady who gave out extra cookies to kids and smiled through every season. But if you ever looked closely past the flour on my apron and the twinkle in my eye, you might have seen something else, a heaviness in my silence, a lifetime of pain kneaded deep beneath the surface like dough waiting to rise. You see, there's a story behind this smile, a story I've buried under decades of cinnamon rolls and morning pies. It's about my brother. It's about my father. It's about the day I stopped being a child and became something else, something broken. And it's taken me 77 years to finally say it out loud. My name is Cecilia Schmidt. I was born in 1948 just outside of Telluride, Colorado, in a weathered cabin tucked between fir trees and wildflowers. My daddy, Walter Schmidt, was a logger tough, broad-shouldered, and quiet as a thundercloud before it breaks. My mama, Margaret, was soft-spoken and pale, the kind of woman who wrung her hands a lot and kept her eyes on the floor. But my world was Ethan. Ethan was my older brother, 2 years ahead of me in school, and light years ahead in bravery. He had sandy blonde hair that never stayed down, a crooked grin that made people forgive anything, and a heart so big it could have swallowed up the whole valley. Ethan protected me from everything from bullies at school to the chill in the outhouse at night when I was too scared to go alone. He'd sing me old folk songs and press wildflowers into my reading books. We shared everything, our little attic room, our stories, and even our dreams of leaving that cabin behind someday and seeing what lay beyond the mountains. I was 13 when he died. 1 minute he was there, chasing a rabbit through the woods with his slingshot, and the next gone. They found him 2 days later near the edge of Bear Creek, his neck broken from a fall down the ravine. They said it was an accident. I wanted to believe them, but something inside me cracked that day. My lungs wouldn't fill with air. My stomach wouldn't hold food. The world had tilted, and I kept falling. So did my mama. She stopped brushing her hair, stopped talking, just sat by the window and waited for something, maybe a miracle, maybe the end. I don't think she ever came back from that day. And my daddy, he changed too. The silence that once made him seem strong now turned mean. He'd sit on the porch at night with a bottle and a stare so cold it made the summer air feel like frost. He didn't cry. He didn't bury Ethan with us. He just got colder, harder. And when he looked at me, I swear it was like he blamed me for still being alive. There was one night I remember clear as crystal. The house was quiet, too quiet. Mama had gone to her sister's in Montrose for a few days, to rest. She said, I was alone in the kitchen, trying to finish the dishes when I heard the floor creak behind me. I turned, dish towel in hand, to see Daddy standing there, his face unreadable, his eyes glassy. That was the first time. I don't remember the exact moment it happened. Trauma does that. It shatters time into jagged little pieces, and you never quite know which ones are real. But I remember the smell of whiskey. I remember the cold of the linoleum floor on my back. And I remember staring at the crack in the ceiling, begging Ethan wherever he was to come back and save me. But he didn't, and neither did Mama. When she returned, God knows I tried to tell her, but the words tangled in my throat like thorns. And when I finally mustered the courage, she simply turned her face away and whispered, Don't you dare bring more shame into this house. So I swallowed my pain. I buried it deep beneath my ribs and wore silence like armor. I went to school, I came home. I scrubbed the floors and did the laundry, and I kept my eyes low, just like Mama had taught me. I was only 14 when I noticed the changes. I was always tired, nauseated. My body didn't feel like mine anymore. I hadn't bled in weeks. I didn't know much about biology back then, but I knew enough. I was pregnant, and that's where the story truly begins. Before the silence, before the terror, before the stains I couldn't wash off my soul, there was Ethan. And for a while, that was enough to keep me whole. We were just mountain kids, wild and barefoot most of the year, with pine needles in our hair and dirt smudged across our cheeks. Ethan made everything feel safe. When thunder cracked across the valley, I'd crawl under his blanket and he'd whisper, "Don't worry. Cece, thunder's just the clouds talking." When I skinned my knees running too fast through the trees, he'd patch me up with spit and dandelion stems and tell me I was braver than Annie Oakley. He wasn't just my brother. He was my best friend, my guardian, my world. We shared a cramped attic room in our cabin up on Mill Gulch Road. Winters were rough. The wind cut through the walls like knives, and snow piled so high against the windows it felt like we were buried alive. But Ethan would press his body close to mine under the heavy wool blankets and hum old folk tunes he learned from Grandpa. I used to pretend those songs were spells, songs that could keep the cold and sadness out. He made up stories about how we'd escape someday. "We'll get out of this place. Cece," he'd say, "we'll hitch a ride to California, buy a used truck, and start a roadside diner. You'll make the pies, and I'll flip the pancakes. We'll call it Schmidt's Shack and play rock and roll all day." I used to laugh so hard at that idea, me, running a diner, but he'd insist, "You've got magic hands. The way you bake, you could bring the whole town to its knees." Back then, I believed him about everything. We lived simply, but poor doesn't always feel like poor when you're a child wrapped in love. Mama was distant, but she kept the house clean and made supper each night. Daddy, before the change, was quiet but present. He'd come home with fresh firewood stacked on his back, and sometimes even a peppermint stick or a hand-carved toy for me or Ethan. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was enough, until the day it wasn't. It was the first week of October, the leaves on the aspens glowing gold and red like firelight dancing across the mountain. Ethan had been gone most of the afternoon, said he was going to check the traps we'd set along the creek. When he didn't come home by dusk, I remember the cold starting to settle deep in my belly, that kind of cold that doesn't come from the wind. Daddy didn't look up from his chair. "He'll be back," he muttered. Mama looked worried, but not enough. She just kept peeling potatoes, hands trembling more than usual. The sun disappeared, then the moon rose. No Ethan. I barely slept that night. Every sound outside made my heart jump. I imagined him injured, maybe caught in a trap himself, or worse, stuck somewhere with no one to hear his cries. I pressed my hands over my ears and hummed the lullaby he used to sing, as if that could bring him back. It was 2 days before they found him. The sheriff said he'd fallen from the ridge above Bear Creek, slipped on loose rocks. His neck had snapped on impact, quick and painless, they said, but when I saw his face in the casket, nothing about it looked peaceful. His lips were slightly parted. His eyes, though closed, seemed tense, like he was trying to scream, and the sound got stuck inside forever. I screamed enough for both of us. The funeral was small, a few neighbors, some boys from school. Mama clutched her Bible so tight her knuckles turned white. Daddy didn't cry, didn't speak, just stood there like stone, and I wept until my throat bled. Ethan was buried beneath the aspens. the same trees that once carried our laughter. Now they carried only silence. Everything changed after that. The light in our house dimmed, even in the brightest part of day. The rooms felt dark. Mama barely spoke. She took to sitting by the fireplace, rocking back and forth, murmuring scripture under her breath. She stopped cooking, stopped cleaning. Her hands, once so quick and gentle, now only shook and trembled. Daddy grew colder, angrier. He'd slam doors, stomp across the floor at night, sit on the porch for hours with a bottle and a stare that cut through wood. The grief, I suppose, was too big for him, and instead of letting it swallow him whole, he spit it out at us, at me. I was 13, a child on the cusp of growing up. I didn't understand the shape of grief, how it bends people. I only knew that my world had cracked open like a dropped plate, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't piece it back together. I started sleeping with Ethan's flannel shirts. I'd hold one close to my face and inhale the faint scent of pine and sweat, and cry myself to sleep. Some nights, I'd wake up thinking I'd heard his voice, but it was just the wind, or worse, Daddy's footsteps. He began to look at me differently. At first, I didn't recognize it for what it was, a long stare, a strange smile, the way his hand lingered a moment too long on my back. I didn't have the words for it. I only had fear. Mama had gone away for a few days to her sisters in Montrose. Daddy said she needed rest. I begged to go with her, but he barked at me, told me I needed to be a woman now and take care of the house. I didn't understand what that meant, at least. Not yet. That night, the house was dead quiet. The air felt too still. I had just finished washing the dishes when I turned around and found him standing in the doorway, watching me. And that's when the last thread of childhood snapped. I didn't know then how long it would go on. I didn't know yet that I was already being broken in ways that would take me a lifetime to understand. All I knew was that Ethan was gone, and no one was coming to save me. The days that followed were a blur of shadows and dread. The first time wasn't the last, it was just the beginning. Once the line had been crossed, there was no going back. He had tasted power over me, and I had nowhere to run. Mama returned 3 days later, looking more fragile than before. Her eyes were ringed in gray, her voice so thin it barely stirred the air. She didn't ask about the bruises on my wrist, didn't question why I avoided Daddy's gaze or why I flinched every time he entered the room. Maybe she knew, maybe she didn't want to know. The truth would have been too heavy for her already broken soul. I was just 13. I didn't have the language to describe what was happening to me. I only knew that the person who was supposed to protect me had become the monster in the room, that my home, my only home, had turned into a prison with no bars, just silence and shame. He was careful at first, always waited until Mama left to go to church or the general store. He'd call me into the living room or the back shed, and his voice would sound calm, almost gentle, but his eyes, they were never gentle. They were hollow, mean, cold, like river ice. He'd say things like, "This is your fault. If your brother hadn't died, none of this would be happening." Or, "Don't cry. You owe me for staying alive." And I believed him. I really did. I thought I must have done something wrong, that maybe the way I laughed or the way my hair curled made him look at me differently. Shame stuck to me like soot, impossible to scrub off. I carried it in my chest, in my belly, in the way I hunched my shoulders and kept my eyes low. School became my only escape, but even there, I was a ghost. I sat in the back, Didn't raise my hand, barely spoke. My grades slipped. I stopped drawing something Ethan had once told me I was good at. Every time someone looked at me too long, I felt like they knew, like they could smell the filth on me. One afternoon, our school nurse, Mrs. Callahan, pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home. I froze. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would crack my ribs. I forced a smile and said I was just tired, that Mama was sick and I was helping more with chores. She nodded, gently touched my arm, and said I could talk to her any time. I never did. I was too scared, too loyal to my silence. At night, I would stare at the ceiling, lips moving in soundless prayers. I didn't even know what I was praying for. Not forgiveness. I didn't think God would offer that to a girl like me. Maybe just for it all to end, one way or another. Mama had gotten worse. She spent whole days in bed, claiming migraines or heart palpitations. Daddy took to locking the liquor cabinet, but still came home smelling like a distillery. His hands were always stained with oil or sap, and when they touched me, I would disappear. I learned how to make myself small, how to leave my body without moving, how to pretend the ceiling had stars and that Ethan was up there somewhere, waiting for me. Then came winter. Thick snow blanketed the mountains, cutting off most of the roads. School was canceled for nearly a week after a blizzard, which meant I was trapped in that house. With him, it was the worst it had ever been. That week, something in him changed. He didn't even pretend to hide anymore. He called me Margaret by accident once, then slapped me when I corrected him. He started drinking earlier in the day. Sometimes he would cry afterward, weep like a child into his hands, and say he didn't know what he was doing, that he missed Ethan, that he missed being a family, that I reminded him too much of Mama when she was young. Those moments scared me more than the violence, because they made me feel sorry for him, and that was the cruelest part, how abuse confuses the heart. I hated him, feared him, but sometimes, when he slumped into that old armchair and buried his face in his hands, I wanted to lay a blanket over his shoulders, wanted him to be better, to be my father again. But he never was, and he never would be. By the time spring arrived, my body had already begun to betray me. My chest ached, my skirts no longer fit right, and I felt tired in ways I couldn't explain. At first, I thought it was just the weight of grief and trauma, that maybe I was dying inside, finally giving up. But then the nausea came, the vomiting in the mornings, the fainting spells, the strange fluttering in my belly when I lay down. I didn't know much about what it meant to be pregnant. Back then, girls didn't get that kind of education. But I knew enough to understand the truth when my monthly bleeding didn't come for 2 cycles. I knew enough when I stood before the mirror one morning and saw the curve just beginning to form under my nightgown. My first thought wasn't even about the baby. It was about Ethan. If he were alive, none of this would have happened. He would have protected me, taken me away, stood between me and the monster our father had become. I pressed both hands against my belly and whispered his name, over and over, as if it could undo what had been done. When Mama finally noticed, it was too late to deny. My body was speaking, loud and clear. She didn't ask who the father was. She didn't have to. She slapped me across the face so hard my ears rang, then fell to her knees and wept. "You wicked, wicked girl," she sobbed. "What have you brought into this house?" I tried to speak, to explain, but she wouldn't listen. "Don't lie," she screamed. "Not about this. I won't let you drag this family into the pit." And just like that, the door to her heart slammed shut. For the second time in my life, I was utterly alone. No one asked how I felt. No one held me when the nightmares came. No one offered comfort when my stomach cramped or when I cried so hard I choked on my breath. The house was filled with silence again, only this time. It wasn't grief. It was fear. It was shame. It was a storm building beneath the floorboards. And me, I was a child, carrying another child. A life forming inside a broken girl. I didn't know yet what I would do. I only knew this. I had to get out. I don't remember the exact moment I decided to leave. Maybe it wasn't a moment at all. Just a slow buildup like water collecting behind a dam until it finally bursts. All I knew was that I couldn't stay. Not in that house. Not with him. Not with a child growing inside me. A constant reminder of everything I couldn't speak aloud. Mama stopped looking at me. I'd pass her in the hallway, and it was like I didn't exist. Her shoulders slumped forward, her hands always wringing at nothing. She still made supper quiet, plain meals that nobody talked through, but she never said a word to me. Not even when the buttons on my dress stopped closing or I winced while climbing stairs. Her eyes were empty, hollow like the sound of wind through dead trees. And Daddy acted like nothing had changed. He still sat on the porch every evening, sipping from his flask, his boots muddy from the logging mill. He'd glance at my belly sometimes, but there was no shame in his gaze, just a kind of sick satisfaction, like he owned me now in every possible way. One night, I woke to find him sitting in my room. I don't know how long he'd been there. The moonlight poured through the window, casting a sharp shadow across his face. He looked calm, too calm. His hands rested on his knees, and he didn't speak for a long while. I just lay there, frozen, barely breathing. Finally, he said, "You'll need to be ready soon." For what I asked, my voice no louder than a whisper. For birth, babies come fast sometimes. You'll want to have clean towels and hot water ready. I turned my face to the wall. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the sheets off and throw them at him, claw at his face, curse his name. But instead, I stared at a crack in the plaster and imagined myself somewhere else, anywhere else. He stood slowly and placed a hand on the curve of my belly. Strong one. He murmured, "Gonna be a boy, I bet." I didn't move until I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall, and even then, I lay there until dawn, eyes open, heart like thunder in my chest. I had no plan, no money, no help. But the fear of staying had finally become greater than the fear of leaving. That was the tipping point. A week later, when Daddy left for town to fetch a shipment from the mill, and Mama was napping in her chair, I packed a satchel, a few clothes, a blanket, a jar of coins I'd been saving since I was 9. I stuffed in a few apples, some biscuits from the tin, and a pair of Ethan's old socks. Then I took a final look around my room, the worn quilt, the chipped dresser, the dusty window pane. None of it felt like home anymore, just relics from a life that had collapsed. I left a note not for Mama, not even really for anyone. Just one line, scrawled in pencil on a piece of notebook paper, "I can't stay where I'm dying." And I walked. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew that the town of Ouray was about 30 miles east, tucked between steep canyon walls, and that it had people, lights, movement, a place to disappear. I followed the old mining trail along the ridge, the same one Ethan and I used to take when we played explorers. I kept my head down and my coat tight around my belly. My shoes pinched, my back ached, and the weight of the baby pulled on my spine like a stone, but I kept walking. I slept that night beneath a spruce tree, curled up in my coat, shivering despite the blanket. I had one biscuit left and half a jar of water, and in my sleep, I dreamed of Ethan. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with those warm, mischievous eyes and nodded. The next morning, I stumbled into Ouray just before noon. My feet were bleeding. My vision swam. People stared as I passed the pregnant teenage girl, limping down Main Street like a ghost. I saw shopkeepers shake their heads. A woman cover her child's eyes. I didn't care. Let them stare. Let them whisper. At least they weren't him. I collapsed in front of a brick building with a sign that read, Carter's Corner Cafe. The smell of fresh bread and coffee drifted out the window, making my stomach twist with hunger. That's when she found me, Evelyn Carter. She was tall, solid, with gray hair tied back in a bun and deep creases around her eyes that spoke of years and kindness. She wore a flour-dusted apron and had the kind of presence that made you want to sit up straighter. She knelt beside me without a word, placed a cool hand on my forehead, and said gently, "Let's get you inside. Honey, I don't know why I trusted her. Maybe because she didn't ask questions right away. Maybe because she didn't recoil. She helped me up, led me into the cafe, and brought me a bowl of soup I couldn't even finish because I was crying too hard. When I woke the next morning, I was in a small back room above the cafe, tucked under a quilt that smelled like lavender. My bag sat by the dresser. My shoes had been cleaned. And on the nightstand, there was a note in looping script. "You're safe here. We'll talk when you're ready. Evelyn." I broke then, not from pain, but from the sudden absence of it, from the terrifying freedom of being safe, even for a moment. I cried into that pillow until my chest ached. Then I slept. The days that followed were slow. Healing takes time, and trust takes longer. Evelyn never pressed me. She offered me small jobs around the cafe, washing dishes, folding napkins, sweeping the front step. The customers mostly ignored me, or worse, whispered behind their menus. But Evelyn stood firm. "You let them talk." She told me once, "They don't know your story, but I do." One morning, as I was setting out jars of jam, she looked at me and said, "You're due soon, aren't you?" I froze. She walked over and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. I've seen enough swollen ankles and pale faces in my life to know, "Darling, you don't need to explain. Just tell me how I can help." I opened my mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, I nodded, and for the first time in months, I felt something crack open in my chest. Hope. It was still small, still fragile, but it was there. And sometimes that's all a person needs. The days turned warmer, and the snow that once blanketed the mountains melted into rushing streams that sang through the canyons of Ouray. Evelyn said spring always came a little later here, but when it did, it made everything bloom at once, flowers, bees, and second chances. I didn't feel like I was blooming, not yet, but I was breathing again. Each morning, I helped open Carter's Corner Cafe. I'd sweep the porch, wipe down the tables, and fill sugar jars while Evelyn kneaded bread in the back. She'd talk while she worked about her late husband, about her kids who'd moved away, about how she'd once been young and pregnant and scared too. She never pried. Just left the door open for me to speak if I wanted to. And one day, I did. I told her everything. We sat on the back step after closing. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dirt road, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. I started with Ethan how much I loved him, how he died, and how nothing made sense afterward. I told her about my father, about the nights I can't forget, and the words that still haunt me. I told her about Mama, how she vanished even though she never left the house. And finally, I told her about the child growing inside me, not just a baby, but a bruise made flesh, a secret I carried because I had no choice. Evelyn didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp or reach for a tissue. She just listened. And when I finished, when I was shaking and breathless and hollow, she turned to me and said, "You are not what he did to you." That sentence sat in the air between us, heavy and healing. "I see strength in you, Cecilia," she continued. "You walked away. You survived. And now, you're about to bring life into this world, not because of him, in spite of him." I broke then, again. But it was a different kind of breaking, a releasing, like something poisonous being drained out of me. From that night on, Evelyn didn't just care for me. She walked beside me. She took me to see a midwife named Mary who lived on the edge of town. Mary was gentle, with warm hands and a laugh that made me feel like I was something more than a mistake. She examined me, nodded slowly, and said, "This baby's coming soon. Maybe 2 weeks." I was terrified, but also ready, or at least as ready as a 15-year-old girl could be. The days passed in a strange blur. My back hurt constantly. My feet were swollen. I could barely bend over. At night, I'd lie on the small cot in Evelyn's upstairs room and press my hand to my belly, feeling the little kicks and rolls beneath my skin. I didn't know if I wanted to love this baby. I didn't know if I could. But I spoke to them anyway. "I'm sorry." I whispered more than once. "I didn't ask for you, but you're here now, and I'll try. I wasn't praying for a miracle. I was just hoping for a beginning that didn't hurt." Then, one morning, I felt something shift. It started as a cramp, deep in my lower back, then another, and another. I tried to walk it off, thinking maybe I'd strained myself cleaning the stovetop. But by late afternoon, I was bent over the sink, gripping the edge, panting through waves of pain that came faster and harder. Evelyn took one look at me and said, "It's time." She sent a neighbor boy to fetch Mary and prepared the little back room with towels, blankets, and boiling water. I'd read stories about childbirth, heard tales whispered between older girls at school, but nothing prepares you for it. Nothing prepares you for the feeling of your own body cracking open to bring another into the world. I labored through the night. Evelyn held my hand. Mary coached me through every contraction. I screamed. I cried. I begged for it to stop. I cursed my father. I cursed God. I cursed myself. And then, at just past 3 a.m., there was silence, followed by a wail. That sound, it didn't sound like pain. It sounded like proof that I was still here, that something pure could still be pulled from something so ugly. Mary wrapped the baby in a warm towel and placed it in my arms. "A girl," she said softly, "healthy as a June colt." I stared down at her tiny red-faced fists, balled, and eyes squeezed shut, and felt something I hadn't expected. Love, not the kind that explodes like a firework, the kind that creeps in quietly and takes root before you know it. A fragile, hesitant love, but love nonetheless. I named her Hope, not because I was hopeful, but because I wanted her to be Hope Carter Schmidt. Evelyn wept when I told her. She said she'd never been more honored. In the days that followed, I rested while Evelyn and Mary took turns helping with feedings, changing swaddles, and warming bottles. I was sore, exhausted, and overwhelmed. But I wasn't alone. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't alone. Sometimes, when Hope slept curled against my chest, I'd whisper stories about Ethan. I wanted her to know that once, a boy with a slingshot and a crooked smile taught me how to dream, that he would have protected her, that she came from something dark. Yes, but that she could become something light. Hope was my beginning, and I would do whatever it took to make sure her life looked nothing like mine had. The weeks after Hope's birth passed quietly, each day shaped by soft routines and small triumphs. She cried often in the beginning, waking me every few hours in the middle of the night. But I didn't mind. Not really. Her cries meant she was alive. They reminded me that she wasn't a dream or a shadow I hadn't imagined her into existence. She was here, real, mine. Evelyn insisted I take my time recovering. Your body's been through war. Honey, she said, pressing a hot mug of chamomile tea into my hands one morning, and so has your heart. I wanted to argue, to say that I wasn't broken, but deep down, I knew she was right. The healing came slowly, but it came. I started working part-time at the cafe again, mostly during slow hours. Evelyn had cleared a spot near the kitchen where Hope's little bassinet sat beneath a sunny window. I'd glance at her between wiping counters and pouring coffee, my chest swelling every time she stirred or stretched. Some customers whispered. A few stared too long. There was a woman, Mrs. Delaney, who once muttered something about poor choices loud enough for me to hear, but Evelyn, bless her soul, leaned over the counter, looked her square in the eye, and said, "We don't judge in this cafe, and if you can't eat without bitterness, you're welcome to take your order to go." I never forgot that. Despite the kindness around me, fear still followed me like a shadow. Every time the bell over the cafe door rang, my heart jumped. I'd glance up, expecting to see him, my father, standing there, mouth tight, eyes like stone. I'd imagine him dragging me out by my wrist, calling me a thief, a runaway, worse. There were nights I'd dream of his voice shouting my name, his boots on the stairs, the weight of him pressing down on everything I'd built. I didn't tell Evelyn how often I checked the back door locks, how I avoided going to the general store unless someone walked with me, how I sometimes jumped when a man spoke too loudly nearby. That kind of fear doesn't disappear just because you're in a new town. It lingers, like smoke in your lungs. One evening, as the mountains turned dusky purple, I sat on the back step with Hope swaddled in my lap. She was 5 weeks old and had just started focusing on faces. Her tiny eyes locked on mine, and for a moment I felt seen, not for what had happened to me, but for who I might still become. That's when Evelyn stepped outside and sat beside me. "You're waiting for him," she said gently. "Aren't you?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked out at the trees beyond the road, at the golden light spilling through the leaves. "I keep thinking he'll come," I said finally, "that he'll find me, take her away, drag me back." Evelyn reached for my hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. "You left. That takes strength." "Cecilia, not many women do. I don't feel strong," I whispered. "I feel like I'm always one step away from losing everything." She nodded. "That's what surviving trauma feels like. But you've already done the hardest part, getting out. Now comes the next hardest part, staying out, staying free. And that's a choice you'll make every single day." Her words sank deep into me. She didn't pretend it would be easy. She didn't offer promises. But somehow, that made it more believable, more solid, a truth I could hold on to. That night, I wrote a letter to Mama. I didn't plan to send it. I didn't even know if she was still at the old cabin. but I needed to get the words out. I told her I had given birth to a little girl, that I was safe, that I'd found kindness in a stranger's kitchen and strength in myself I didn't know existed. I told her I wished things had been different between us, but that I no longer carried her silence like a wound. I folded the letter, tied it with ribbon, and placed it in my journal. Hope would read it one day. As summer approached, the town of Ouray came to life. Tourists filled the sidewalks. The scent of wildflowers and coffee drifted on the air, and laughter returned to places that had been quiet too long. I started smiling more, laughing, even, sometimes. I'd catch my reflection in the bakery window and hardly recognize the girl looking back. She still had scars, yes, but there was something else too, a softness, a strength. Hope grew like a weed. Her hair came in dark and thick, her fingers always curling around mine like she was afraid I'd let go. But I never did. Not once. She was my purpose now. And though I didn't know what the future held, I began to believe, slowly, that I might have one. By the time Hope turned 6 months old, she had learned how to sit up on her own and squeal with delight at the sound of a coffee grinder. Evelyn used to joke that Hope would probably walk before she ever crawled, just to keep up with me. And maybe she was right. I had become steady, almost without realizing it. My hands were no longer shaky. My voice had stopped trembling when strangers asked me questions. I still double-checked locks at night and sometimes jolted awake from dreams I didn't understand. But the weight in my chest no longer felt like it would crush me. Each morning I woke up to the smell of rising dough and the soft rustle of baby blankets. I tied my apron, kissed Hope's forehead, and helped Evelyn open the cafe. We worked in rhythm, like old gears that finally learned how to move without grinding. Then one afternoon, Evelyn sat me down after the lunch rush. Her gray eyes looked serious, but not unkind. "I've been thinking," she began, drying her hands on a towel. "I'm not getting any younger, and I've been running this cafe for over 25 years. I raised my eyebrows, unsure of what she was getting at. "I want to teach you how to run the place," she said. The words knocked the air from my lungs. I blinked. But I don't know how to run a business. I didn't even finish high school. Evelyn smiled. "You think I had a business degree when I opened this place? I had grit, a good biscuit recipe, and a whole lot of prayer. And you, sweetheart, you've got all that and more." Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. Not even Ethan. "You gave me a home," I whispered. She leaned forward, touching my hand. "And you gave me a reason to believe again. You saved this place more than I ever did. People don't just come for the food, Cecilia. They come because of the warmth you bring, because of hope. It was the first time I believed I could be more than what had been done to me. That maybe my life didn't have to be a cautionary tale, but something stronger, something whole. From that day forward, Evelyn began teaching me everything she knew: how to manage the books, how to order flour and eggs in bulk, how to deal with cranky vendors and charmed regulars. She even had me stand behind the register, counting back change with nervous fingers. By the end of the month, I was running the cafe every Tuesday on my own. Hope stayed close, napping in her playpen behind the counter or perched on my hip while I wiped down tables. She became part of the cafe's soul. People would peek in just to see her smile or wave her chubby hand. Evelyn called her the heart of the place. And I agreed, sometimes. I'd catch myself watching Hope as she babbled and reached for crumbs on the floor. I'd marvel at how something so precious had come from so much hurt. I hadn't told anyone outside of Evelyn the truth about who Hope's father was. In Ouray, people made their assumptions. Some thought I was a runaway bride. Others figured I'd been seduced and abandoned. Let them wonder. The truth wasn't theirs to carry. One evening, just before closing, a girl came into the cafe. She couldn't have been older than 17. Her jacket was too thin for the weather, and her eyes looked empty like mine had once looked. She sat in the far booth, staring at a cold cup of coffee. I brought her a slice of pie and didn't charge her. She looked up, startled. I didn't order anything. I smiled softly. "It's on the house." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thanks." As I walked away, I felt Evelyn's eyes on me from behind the counter. She gave a small nod, the kind of nod that says, "You've come full circle." That night, after I'd put Hope to bed and wiped the last table clean, Evelyn placed a small envelope in my hands. "What's this?" I asked. She smiled. "Just open it." Inside was a notarized document, something about co-ownership. My name was on it. I looked at her in disbelief. I meant what I said. She told me, "You're the soul of this place now. And when I'm gone, it's yours, officially." "I can't," I began. "You already are," she said firmly. "You've earned this." I cried that night, alone in the quiet kitchen, not out of grief this time, but out of something softer, gratitude, peace. The realization that after everything I'd endured, life had finally given me a small piece of good, a cafe, a daughter, and a future. Summer in Ouray brought tourists, festivals, and the smell of fresh peaches from the Saturday market. Hope had just turned one and was waddling through the cafe, gripping chair legs and giggling at every new sound. Her curls bounced as she moved, and her laugh could brighten even the most tired soul. I was happy, truly happy, for the first time in my life. And then the letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope, addressed in tight cursive, Cecilia Schmidt, Carter's Corner Cafe, Ouray, Co. There was no return address. I felt the air tighten as soon as I saw it. I waited until the end of the day, when the last pie had cooled and Hope was asleep in her crib upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table, Evelyn across from me, and opened it with trembling fingers. There were only a few lines, written in my mother's hand. "Cecilia, your father is dead. He passed last month, heart attack. I don't expect you to care, but I thought you should know. We are selling the house. I won't write again. Mama, I read it 3 times. My eyes dry, but my hands cold." Evelyn didn't say anything right away. She just reached over and rested her hand on mine, anchoring me in the moment. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought I'd collapse, or scream, or feel something big and furious break free inside me. But all I felt was nothing. Hollow, like someone had finally blown out the last candle in a room I'd locked up long ago. "He's gone," I said softly. Evelyn nodded. It was such a strange sentence. 3 small words that should have carried weight. But instead, they felt irrelevant, as if he'd been gone long before his body stopped working. And Mama, I hadn't heard from her since I left. Her silence had once been the deepest cut of all. But this letter, it didn't bleed. It just sat there, cold, final. That night, I sat by Hope's crib, watching her sleep, her little chest rising and falling, her thumb resting near her mouth. I thought about the man who had given her life but had no place in hers. I thought about the woman who birthed me, who couldn't save me, wouldn't try, and I thought about the child I had become, the one who used to sing with her brother under the trees and dream of pancakes and roadside diners. Maybe part of me had always been waiting for closure, for justice, or at least acknowledgement, but what I had now was something better: distance, freedom, a future that didn't include their names. I folded the letter, tied it in a ribbon, and tucked it in the back of my journal with the others, not as a memory, but as a reminder that I survived. And I didn't just survive. I built something. The next morning, I opened the cafe early. The sun poured through the windows, and the air smelled like cinnamon and lemon zest. I held Hope on my hip, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "We're okay, baby girl. We're more than okay." Evelyn passed me the first tray of muffins and smiled, and we began another day. Time passed the way it always does, quietly, and then all at once. Hope turned 3, then 5, and suddenly she was helping me stir batter in the mornings and writing her name in flour across the cafe counter. She had Evelyn's stubborn chin and Ethan's eyes sharp and curious, always searching the world for wonder. The cafe became ours, officially. Evelyn retired, though she still came by most mornings to sit in her usual corner with a scone and a book. She called it her reward. I called it our miracle. People came from all over to visit Carter's Corner Cafe. They loved our pies. Sure, but more than that. They came for the feeling, the warmth, the welcome, the soft music and quiet kindness that filled every corner of the place. And without even realizing it, I had become a part of something far bigger than the pain I'd escaped. I still had nightmares sometimes. There were nights I'd wake in a sweat, breath caught in my throat, heart pounding like it used to when I heard my father's footsteps in the hallway. But they didn't paralyze me anymore. I'd get up, pour a glass of water, check on Hope, and remind myself that House is gone. That man is gone, and I'm still here. I wrote in my journal often. Sometimes I'd write to Ethan, other times to the girl I used to be, and sometimes I'd write to Hope words I wasn't ready to say out loud yet, but wanted her to know someday. The truth, the pain, the strength it took to hold her and not see him. One afternoon, Hope came home from school and asked, "Mama, how did you know how to be a mom?" I froze. She looked up at me, brown curls tucked behind her ears, eyes wide with trust. I smiled softly and pulled her into my lap. "I didn't," I said, "not at first. I just knew I didn't want you to feel the way I did growing up." And that was enough to start. She hugged me hard, and I held her even harder. I never remarried, never even dated. Really, I had love. Yes, but the kind you build with time and truth, not romance. Hope was more than enough. Evelyn, too. And the life I had built brick by brick, tear by tear, it held more joy than I ever thought possible. Sometimes I would sit by the window after the cafe closed, lights dimmed, a pie cooling on the counter, and watch the stars come out over the mountains. And I'd whisper to the quiet, I made it, because I had, and so much more was still to come. Hope turned 18 last fall. The little girl who once fit in the crook of my arm, wrapped in a quilt and cradled against a heart still trembling with fear, was now a young woman, walking through the front door of the cafe in jeans and a college sweatshirt, her hair bouncing in the autumn wind like a banner of freedom. That morning, I stood by the window of our cafe, Hope's Corner. We renamed it last year, watching her ride her bike toward the community college, strong and sure. And for the first time in a long time, I felt no fear, just pride, deep, soul-filling pride. I still carry the past with me. It never truly leaves. Some nights, when the wind rustles the trees just right, I still hear echoes of a voice that once ruled my world with silence and pain. But I no longer shrink. I no longer hide, because I am not that girl anymore. I am a mother, a survivor, a woman who rebuilt herself from the ruins. People sometimes ask me, Cecilia, how did you survive what happened to you? And I tell them I didn't survive by forgetting. I survived by remembering, but on my terms. I carried my story like a stone in my pocket for years, heavy, secret, buried. But it wasn't until I pulled it out, looked at it in the light, and told the truth that it stopped hurting me. My father is gone now. My mother, too. And so is the house I once called home. All of them faded into the past, like shadows behind glass. But what they did will never define me. What I did next, that's what matters. I raised a daughter with love. I ran a cafe with heart. I built a life from nothing but grit, kindness, and second chances. And if you're hearing this now, if you've made it to the end of this story, maybe there's something in it for you too. Maybe you're someone who has lived through things you've never spoken aloud. Maybe you're still waiting for someone to say, I believe you. You mattered. You still do. So let me be that someone. You are not what they did to you. You are not your shame. You are not your silence. You are the breath you still draw, the hands that still create, the kindness you still give, even when it wasn't given to you. Life has a cruel way of testing the softest hearts, but if you're still standing, still loving, still trying, you've already won. And to anyone who's walked through fire like I have, know this, you don't have to carry it alone. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own journey or the journey of someone you love, please share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us your truth. You never know who you might be helping by speaking up. And if you'd like to hear more real stories like mine about women and men who rose up from ashes to build something beautiful, please consider subscribing to the channel. This isn't just about stories. It's about healing together. Thank you for listening to mine. And remember, sometimes the strongest people are the ones who never got the apology they deserved, but chose to live with purpose anyway. Cecilia Schmidt.